All right, so again, my name is Jeff Hogue. I'm with LegalServer, and what we're doing today is asking the community to get together and talk with us about data collection needs and reporting for the LAV grant. I think you'll find that the LAV data items also overlap with other DOJ domestic violence grants. And the data is really specific and unfortunately different than most of the data that we collect. And maddeningly, some of the data items they want to collect are very similar, for instance, to LSC data items, but just different enough that it needs to be special for LAV. Please feel free, like I said, to interrupt at any point. You're not interrupting. This is designed to be a conversation. What we're going to do is look at what is the universe of LAV cases that you report on, and then go through the actual LAV reporting instrument. I'm pretty sure the one we have is up to date, and we're going to look at the specific items that are in that report and talk about how we get that data out of LegalServer. At the end, we'll talk just a little bit about reporting, and I'll ask folks along the way to volunteer how they do things. And at the end also, if you're willing to share an LAV report that works well for you, that would be great. So, let's see. Someone is not muted and is really loud right now. There we go. All right. The first question. So the first question that I had is, that we have for any complicated grant is, what is the universe of potentially reportable cases? And it looks to me that what most folks are doing is reporting on open cases. Is that right?
That's right. And cases closed during the reporting period.
Okay, and that gets at the way that they phrase it is people served during the time period. Is anyone doing it differently, or are we all saying cases that were open during the reporting period and including cases that were closed during the reporting period? Is anyone using different criteria? Okay, so are we all then, is it possible then to report on a case it is possible then to report on a case in more than one reporting period, right?
That's correct. I know I do. Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So we're all in agreement there? Good. Anything else about the universe of reportable cases of what you can tell LAV? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, now, which brings me to the question of the reporting and how to capture cases that were active during a reporting period, whether they were closed or remained open. I think I played with the report. It's not very helpful. But we may not have gotten there yet.
I see. Yeah, that is would be another way to try to get at it, is just look at all cases that were touched, regardless of status.
Yeah, like i.e. service dates. Somebody put in timekeeping on a particular case during a particular reporting period, because we do have to keep reporting them while they're open and active.
Okay.
Yes, we do that as well.
Who was that said yes, we do that as well?
Gina, I'm at Gulf Coast Legal Services. We also report on any cases that were open or closed during the period, reporting period, but also active, or the case handler has worked on that with DOJ funding during that reporting period. We would count that case as well.
Okay, and are you doing that in your report? You're saying show me all LAV cases with any activity. Is that how you're deciding that they fit that criteria?
We haven't done that before. We could do it that way, because I know our person Libby Von Kennel has a report that does case handler has worked on it. So that's one way to go about it. We just don't close out the case if it's still being worked on.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
In my case, I have never used LegalServer to report on LAV cases. The one that's going to be due in January will be the first one. And I've been using the Muskie report to gather the stats, and the case handlers give me data collection sheets that I data enter into the Muskie website.
Gotcha.
Or case management system, which is what we're trying to eliminate, so we can do everything in LegalServer.
Ron, I see you put a note in chat to use the date open range filter.
Did I?
No, Ron Wilhoit did.
Oh, Ron. Okay.
Did you want to expand on that?
Sure. Yeah, I mean that date open range filter that you can use on reports. That's what it was designed for, was to let you report on cases that had the disposition of open during a range of dates. So, for example, if your report is, I need to report on cases that were open during last month, let's say, just to keep it easy. So you use that filter and say, show me all the cases that were open, no ED on the end, just open in August. And so that would show you a case that was open 5 years ago and was either still open now or maybe it was closed on August 15th. But it had an open disposition during August. Likewise, if the case opened on August 29th, then it would have, regardless of whether or not it's open or closed, it would have had that open disposition during August.
That's exactly what we do. We use the filters to find cases open.
Okay, but that particular report doesn't really report on a lot of the LAV required information. We would have to run the LAV report separately?
No, we can use that. You can use the date open range as a filter in the report.
All right, I'm not understanding.
Okay. Well, in the LAV report, date open range can be one of the filters, just like instead of open.
Oh, okay. That's in there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I got it.
And that was the voice you heard a little bit ago. That was Ron Wilhoit. I imagine most of you know him. He's our support guru. And thanks, Ron. All right. I think we've covered that. So we all know what we're reporting on. But it is a bit tricky, right? Because a lot of programs ask you for open cases or closed cases or let you decide on that universe. But LAV wants active, which is a bit different. Served, really, which is a bit different. So now we're going to move on to the specific items that are in the LAV report. The first one that we decided we might want to talk about just a bit is item 8, which is what percentage of your LAV program grant funds was directed to each of those areas. Somebody's got a little feedback, so if you wouldn't mind, click the green microphone up by the orange button and mute yourself when you're not talking, please. Thank you. So this is kind of interesting. I don't know what we can do because it's broken down into sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. So there's sort of 3 categories here. I think to get at this number for real, the form says grant funds, but it also says you can use resources, funds or resources. So in LegalServer, you can figure out what type of domestic violence is indicated in each case using the domestic violence relationships block. So when you have to report on the type of abuse anyway in relationship to abuser, you can pull this out. But I think this item 8, I know this item 8 contemplates additional kinds of service as well, like specifically mentioned training and victim services. So I throw it back to you guys. What are you doing to come up with this number in item 8? Anyone?
I used the, no one was answering, so I thought I'd pop up. I just used the total of cases that were opened in that period of time and then divide them between the 3 types of victimization, and that's how I come up with my percentage. Right or wrong, that's how I do it.
Yep, no, I think that makes sense. And I think that's what quite a few folks are doing. It seems to suggest that you also could put in as example, put in as resources expended things like if you did training. I'm not sure how you would decide that you did a training on domestic violence and split it among these three topics. I don't see how that makes a lot of sense. But is anyone trying to add in not just percentage of cases, but other services too, as legal LSC programs call them?
We don't, because all of our funding goes just to casework.
Okay. So I'm going to just make a note. I'd say most programs, perhaps all. On case services and not bothering with the additional kinds of potential outreach and training. Okay. All right. If there's no other comments on that, we'll move on. Okay. Training events provided. There's a couple different ways to do this. I mean, the truth is you may have a small enough number of trainings that you provide that you're going to report to LAV that you keep track of it in another way, or maybe those staff may even know off the top of their head what this number is. So, but if not, you can have the outreach profile, if it's dynamic, as Mike pointed out, you can have a funding code on the outreach time slip. You also, if your program divides folks by LegalServer program, in other words, oh, I'm in the housing program, I'm in the foreclosure program, and that spans multiple grants and problem codes. You could assign an outreach a particular kind of program to run a report. There's maybe some organizations out there where you don't even have to do that. You're only going to count it as an LAV training if one of your LAV staff gave it. So there's some programs where people are essentially assigned 100% to some particular grant, and they're LAV or they're not LAV. And then I think the other way I could think of is to have just a couple of specially named outreaches that are LAV training. So how do folks do this? Any volunteers?
This is Tracy with Montana Legal Services.
Hi, Tracy.
I use the outreach form in LegalServer. I've tweaked it so that if somebody selects the DV funding code, it actually pops up an additional page to capture the outreach information, but I do use LegalServer to capture it.
Okay, so they pick, so it's sort of like this on your outreach event. You say you have a DV related one, and then what additional information pops up if they choose that one?
We try and capture some additional information about who we are providing the outreach to, and what kind of materials we're distributing. So we actually go a little bit further than what the this particular grant requires.
Gotcha. And my colleague Mike, if you would help me out with the notes in chat, that'd be great. Mike actually Mike is with LegalServer, and if you see a good piece of documentation on our community site in the help pages, Mike probably made it, and he made these screenshots for us today. So thank you for that, Mike. Okay, that sounds good. Any comments on this? I mean, it looks to me like there's a number of ways to do it. Anyone have any concerns or another method that they use to track? because I would think that not everyone identifies an LAV case by funding code is my, sort of concern for those who have, who don't have that one-to-one relationship between funding code and LAV. But sounds like we covered it. Thank you. Item 21 on the report, and we're getting this straight off of the actual, what we did is went through the actual report that you have to turn in to order these, is the number of victims or survivors served, partially served, and seeking services who were not served. So this breaks down to, again, each case, again, we've collected sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking as what type of abuse is involved in the case. And where it gets a bit trickier is with the served, partially served, and not served categories. I don't know about you, but when I looked at this, I thought, that's great. We already collect most of this for LSC, but it turns out that the way that LAV collects this data and asks about it is a bit different. So there is a client DV served kind of standard field. Again, we have the domestic violence relationships block. And partially served is one of these selections, but I did want to just ask whether anyone is anyone trying to use a site-wide partially served indicator for this? In other words, is there anyone who's trying to gather partially served people independent of LAV? For example, there was a study a while back where folks were trying to, I think it was LSC said, we want you to figure out who got served but not all the services they requested. Is anyone collecting that data outside of LAV right now?
Not right now. This is Mary from Legal Aid in Albany.
Okay, so then it's got to be a special lookup associated with LAV. I just wondered whether there was still if there were. Go ahead.
Which doesn't mean that they may not ask us to do that again, or it's not useful information. It can be useful information. So, but right now there's no study, as far as I know, going on.
Right, and no one else sort of doing that voluntarily. I raise that just because I think if it were integrated, it could be integrated, but you'd have to think through whether those choices work for all cases. So fortunately, we have it. It's a special block. We're capturing the relationships and domestic violence relationships. There's one little trick here, which is this block can collect, and I think we actually, maybe this is the right place to talk about it. This block collects, you can have the same person, in other words, a spouse, for instance, who's committed multiple kinds of abuse. So you could have domestic violence, DV type is sexual assault, and the relationship to abuser is spouse. And you could have stalking, and the relationship to abuser is spouse. So you can have multiple kinds of DV by perpetrator, which I think matches what LAV is looking for. I hope that's clear to everybody. So if you were going to do that, you would keep hitting the green plus button if there are multiple kinds of DV, even from the same perpetrator. You could add 3 columns, 3 rows for that person.
In theory, this is Bev. In theory, you'd want to list the primary, because they use victimization, so in theory, you'd list the primary one on top, or is there a way to designate that as primary?
There's not a way to designate it as primary. They all go into the list.
Okay.
Okay. Ron or Mike, go ahead.
I was under the impression that you would only report the primary, like even if somebody was a victim of both domestic violence and sexual assault. I'm not sure how or maybe I'm just blanking it out, how you report both for one person. That actually isn't my issue at all as far as served and partially served.
So
I don't know.
well, to address the first part, I think that's a business rule decision that you can make. The block allows you to do that, and I think the way I read the LAV reporting requirements, they allow you to report multiple kinds of abuse, even by the same perpetrator. But if it makes reporting easier, there's no reason why you couldn't have a business rule that says only report the primary, and you could even say only report a single DV type. Does anyone else who's had to report on this have any comments about that?
I wanted to ask a question or make a comment. For the partially served and served, there are times that a client may have more than one type of legal problem, and we might provide full service in one, but only partial service in another. And there's no place on the special pay, grant page to make that different, to differentiate that.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Should I give an example?
Oh no, I think I can totally imagine that, but I think that for the purposes, I don't think LAV has a spot to report that either. I'm not sure where you would put that on the form.
There is. On the Muskie reports, there's ways to list list all the legal issues separately, and for each legal issue, you have a whole form that says whether you provided partial or full service or no service on this particular legal issue.
Okay, and the Muskie, remind me what the Muskie form is?
The Muskie form is the form developed by Muskie in order to respond to the LAV report. I don't know if anybody else uses it, but it's specific to the LAV report. The University of Maine, Muskie Institute.
I don't know. Does anyone else report through them?
Before LegalServer?
No, we haven't.
We've been
If it's
using
a different
them.
legal issue, we open a different case.
Okay.
Right. I think that's kind of, and I can understand why someone might want to do it the other way, but I think that's the cleanest method that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. So great, but that's a good question. That's exactly why we're having this conversation, is to hear from other folks about how they're dealing with the data issues. So reasons not served or were partially served. This is its own lookup. This is in LegalServer. I don't think there's anything especially complicated about this. I'm guessing the answer to this question is no. I did wonder whether anyone was also collecting this outside of LAV. Is anyone collecting this information for non-LAV clients? No? Okay. It has some sort of parallel with the sort of LSC rejection reasons, but it's a bit different and a bit more granular. So are there any questions or issues with that? I think that one's pretty straightforward. No? Okay. Then we get into demographics, and I know, Ron, you have to leave the call early. This may encourage, you may just decide to hang up as soon as we start talking about this. The race and ethnicity, which is really a constant issue. Seems that every funder on the planet decides to ask about race and ethnicity differently. No one seems to use the same methodology, and Hispanic is not a race, it's an ethnicity. They're sort of combined, so it's always a bit complicated. There are some programs that have made a single giant race lookup and a single giant ethnicity lookup, and then they sort it out in reporting. But by default, most likely you'll end up with a special race and ethnicity lookup. Is that right, Ron? This one doesn't seem to match anything other than LAV as far as you know, this list.
Yeah, correct. That doesn't look like LSC or anything else.
This one actually seems to have a bit of a, there's a little bit of artistic license here with South Asian, which is actually not in their lookup. It's not in their list. So you can have a special race and ethnicity lookup just for this. And one thing I skipped early on is that I think I should go back to that for a moment. I think what most folks are doing is putting this on an auxiliary process. So you have an open case, for instance, and then you have a special process that you get to through the actions menu, and you launch your LAV screen. Is that right? Is anyone doing this differently? Or, I mean, this is so many data items, I can't imagine how else you would do it, but is there any other method that folks are using besides using a special form and auxiliary process in LegalServer?
This is Bev. I run a Cases Matters report to get this kind of stuff, the demographics and that kind of stuff. And then I run a VAWA report, and I just match up the information for the two to give me the three basic pieces, whether they're served partially or not, type of victimization, and a relationship to offender. And I just put it in an Excel spreadsheet and sort it that way.
Really? Interesting. So in your LAV, when you run your LAV report, you don't bother putting in columns that include the standard case matter information?
No.
Okay.
I just run them separate. Yeah.
I got you. Okay. Thanks.
I probably should, but that's, to me, at the time, that was the easiest way for me to get the information. So.
Hey, this stuff is so complicated. Whatever works, if it works for you and you got paid, I think you're good to go.
Yeah.
Gender, they only have male, female, and unknown. I'll just point out that if you have a site-wide gender lookup that includes anything other than male, female, or unknown, you'll have to do some matching of the numbers when you create your report. So you'll have to count transgender woman, for instance, and transgender man as what do they call it? Unknown, which I find offensive, but what are we going to do? Okay. Any questions so far? Anybody have any questions just generally on what we've covered so far? No? Okay. All right. So partially demographics. This one, these are age ranges. You can almost everyone ask date of birth as part of intake. So this is just a matter of generating the report. And I think generally folks just list the age, and then what's the best way to do that, Ron? If you want the summary, you get this summary.
Yeah, you can do a summation and use the bins feature, BINS, so you can do your 0 to 12, 13 to 17, and so forth.
I've actually never used the bins feature, Ron. I should learn that one.
It involves math, so. Are you math challenged?
No, actually, I think I'm one of the few lawyers that's not math challenged. Thanks to one math teacher that made it interesting. But okay, well, I think maybe we should. Well, I'll learn it, and then I hope that's useful for folks, because I think then you don't even have to sort through your columns. You can have it summarized in your report.
Yeah, there's a really excellent section in the reports manual on how to do bins.
Great. Everyone knows what the reports manual is, right? It's a documentation about how to do reports. It's over in the community site. Great. Thanks, Ron.
I have a
yep.
question. I have
Go
a
ahead.
question before you leave age. That is one area that for us is always a problem, because it's on our LAV report and is a filter. But then whenever I run the LAV screen, report in LegalServer, it comes up with all the correct information on pending cases and who was partially served or fully served. But then our age crosstab chart is way off by like thousands. And I'm not sure if it's something we can do on our end, but I ran just a sample one while I was sitting here, and yeah, for cases where we're looking at like 78 different clients, it comes up with the ages being broken down in with a total of 2,000 folks.
Okay.
So way off.
Which program are you with?
Gulf Coast Legal Service.
Oh, Gulf Coast. Okay.
And like I said, the screens, the crosstabs that are in Excel for partially served, served, and the different legal, services offered to pending or new or completely correct. But the Section 23 age totals is just out of whack.
Yeah. Ron, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, so if your breakdown total on age is drastically higher than the rest of the report, it sounds like probably you're counting on the summation on age is counting on the wrong value. So if you want to send me a link to the report, I'm happy to take a look at it.
Okay, great. Super. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thank you, Ron. Okay. Birthday. No, the disabled field. That standard, I think most folks are using that standard disabled field. Limited English, we noticed that there are some folks who work this into their standard early intake. So while they're asking about language, they might, this is not logically 100% airtight, but they might say, for instance, that if your primary language is not English, that it then asks you whether the person is limited English. So I think probably most folks are asking that separately, but just as a sort of concept for you to consider that I think I've only seen it in New York City, where they have this branching off of the general questions about language. And then also the immigrant, refugee, or asylum seeker. For those of you who are comfortable with branch logic, that might also, you also could, if you wanted to, work that into your, I thought this was clever, working this into intake as well. So if someone says they're a non-citizen, then the person might be prompted to indicate whether the client or potential client was an immigrant, refugee, or asylum seeker. Now that adds to questions to the intake. And Ron, we're not introducing a danger right there. If this is not answered and you run a report, I guess your report would have what happens to the ones that are not checked yes or no when you run a report on their status of this field.
So that immigrant refugee field is just not answered?
So yeah.
It's just going to be a null. So if you filtered on it, well, it's a Boolean field, so you can filter, you have the options of is yes, is no, is yes or null, and so forth. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there might be additional cleverness to watch out for when you run the report on it. But is anyone on the call working either of these questions into their intake, limited English or immigrant, or leaving it? Are you all leaving it as a separate tab later on? Sounds like maybe New York City is the only one doing that. Then we have the wonderful rural field. I don't think there's any explanation of that, as I recall, in the instructions. My family would not consider where I live in. Well, I live in New York State, so my family wouldn't consider this rural. But yeah, so we have a yes/no. Up to you to decide and decipher what rural means. The victim-survivor relationship to offender by victimization. It's similar to the chart above, except now it's the straight-up relationship to the offender and the type of victimization. And here's where I got this multiples from, is it says if a victim or survivor experienced more than one type of victimization and or was victimized by more than one perpetrator, count the victim slash survivor in all categories that apply. So the total number of relationships must be at least, what? I don't know what that blank is. And you total them up, essentially, is what this is saying. So I'm not saying it's wrong to only list the primary. I think that's a lot simpler, but you can, at least in 24, it looks to me like you can count all the multiples if that makes sense. Does anybody have any comments about that? No? Okay. Oh, great. When Ron posted in the chats a link, or Mike did, straight to the using bins in the reports manual, the discussion of how to use a bin in reports as it appears in the reports manual. Great. So 25 is victim services provided by lawyers. This is typically, again, just separate lookups. We have safety plan provided by attorney or non-attorney, support services provided by attorney or non-attorney, and pro se clinics provided by attorney or non-attorney. One question I had for the community is, would you count this again? I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. What if this changed, or what if you go to report this case in the next quarter? You would, if you only had 3 clients and you did, or 1 client, you only did 1 service for them, would you count them again in the next reporting period?
Can you say that again? I didn't understand.
Yeah, maybe I said that in a confusing way. I guess I did. In the next reporting period, if this case is still open, you're going to report all this information again, I think, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, Mike, if you just make that note. Victim services provided by other staff. Let's see. And the distinction here is, why are we doing this again? Oh, right. We're gathering the same information, the information for 25 and 26 using the same field. So this gives you the choice. It's either or. And there's safety plan, support services, and pro se clinics. And then how are we using the non-attorney legal advocacy? Right there. Goes right into this row. If it's just a counting issue. Was there any non-attorney legal advocacy in the case, yes or no? Any question or comments on that section? No? Okay. Legal issues. Boy, it sure would be cool if these were the same as the LSC ones. I realize not everyone's an LSC grantee, but it's a pretty standard list of issues, and this gets a little bit close to legal problem category, but just misses it. So we have it's its own separate lookup, and you'll note that immigration matters are broken down into subcategories, and I think it was New York City that if you were an asylum seeker or whatnot, they prompted you and went ahead and collected this information right there at intake for that section G on immigration matters of which kind of immigration matter the person had. So the way we're collecting this is in the domestic violence outcomes block, and so typically, we'll have this is the entire lookup of all of the legal issues. Now, one thing here that I'm not sure how we are collecting is this pending versus new. So somebody help me out with that. How are we distinguishing between pending versus new?
Look at the date opened.
Right.
If a case has an open date prior to the reporting period, it's a pending case. If it has an open date in the reporting period, it's a new case.
Okay. So that's maybe just switch that filter on and off in your LAV report, and you can see your totals.
I'd like to know, I'm not even quite sure what report to run to gather all this information. The one that's called, quote, LAV doesn't really have any of the information that we're asking for.
Sounds like, well, I'll ask anyone actually who has an LAV report that you feel like captures most of these fields. Well, let me step back for a moment and we'll jump ahead to reporting.
I'm out.
Say it again?
I'm sorry, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but
No.
I'm looking at reports and actually I did some data entry and I thought, it worked fine. But then I tried to run a report that would capture what I just entered. I don't know what report to run.
Right. Well, there isn't a canned report that is going to collect LAV precisely the way you do. So there'll be modifications to any LAV report that you'll need to make to capture it in the way that makes sense to you. But I would love it if someone had what they felt was a pretty comprehensive LAV report. If you don't mind sharing it, if you could email it to me and or Ron, that'd be great, and we can. I think we just distribute it on the email list, right, Ron, or put it on the community site as an example.
Yeah, I would typically put it on the reports example reports page.
Great. And I don't Mike. Do we already have one over there for LAV? I probably should have looked, but I did not.
I don't know off the top of my head, but I will check.
Okay, Mike will look at that for us. So that'd be great. Now, I could also be that you, just for the pure number of columns, that if nothing else, that you end up running more than one report to gather all the information. Does anyone want to volunteer now? Is there anyone who feels like they've kind of nailed the LAV report and gotten as much as they can into a single report and want to volunteer their name?
I guess not.
This is Montana. I'm happy to share mine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in watching the training, I don't know if I have all the fields that you're talking about. I know I created my own fields to capture that information a while back, but I'm happy to share the report that I use because it gathers both the case matter and the LAV specific information into one report.
Great. Well, I'll be happy to take a look at it. Thank you very much. I appreciate you volunteering. Yep, and there's Ron posted a link. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
called VAWA information. Yep.
A generic VAWA information report. So.
Okay. So it sounds like, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Tracy, could you include your cell phone number when you send their example report so I can put it in there so people can call you?
My cell phone number?
Well, I think what Ron's saying is he doesn't want to answer 100 emails about why Tracy's custom report doesn't work for me. Oh, yeah.
Oh, dear.
Yeah,
I mean, goes unpunished.
That's right. Well, it's a good point though that we will be looking for good example LAV reports, and there will be good examples, but because each program may use some custom fields and may actually interpret this data differently, no report's going to probably be just plug and play. It's still going to be require some analysis and potential changes for each program. But it can save some time, so that would be great. Okay, number of victims or survivors who received assistance with multiple issues. And what we have here is just a field that says multiple legal issues. And, so this goes back to, like, this is also part of the whole LSC, for instance, distinguishing between when do you need a new case, right? Like if you're trying to report anything, any service, I'd say A or above, I think LSC would say that needs to be a separate case. But we all do little things in the middle of a case on tangential issues. Like you're in a divorce and maybe someone just wanted a little bit of information about a real property issue or even a will thing. Like I think he's about to get a bunch of money from his grandpa or something. So there are other legal issues that can touch it, and no one knows where, I think, unless somebody wants to volunteer with the definition, no one knows where the boundary is between a related legal issue and something that should be a separate case. I think every program interprets that differently. But regardless of how you interpret it, you can use a single Boolean, meaning yes, no, field in LegalServer to say multiple legal issues. Any comments on that, guys? Okay. Legal outcomes. Again, this just makes me so sad that whoever made this didn't tool on over to one of the standards that already exist for this, because it's so close, for instance, to the LSC outcomes that most of you call it case disposition or closing code, that it's real close. But unfortunately, we must have our own lookup, because these choices are, as you'll see in the domestic violence outcomes block, for that legal issue. And then you can enter multiple legal issues in order to comply with the reporting requirements. There is A, B, C, and then final order. There's a couple different levels of court decision. This list is cut off in order to save some space, but that lookup can of course be modified. But they include this. In negotiated resolution, filed action or no filed action, which is something that, for instance, the LSC lookup doesn't capture. So I assume everyone's using the DV outcomes block to capture this, but maybe not. If you have a custom one or you're interpreting this through something out of the LSC dispositions, for instance, if you want to speak up and tell us how you do it, that'd be swell. Oh, sounds like we're all, at least on the call, we're all using the LAV specific outcomes block for this. So now we're going to talk about reporting for just a moment. It sounds like we may have an example or two to circulate. I would encourage anybody who feels like they've done a really good job of condensing this into a single report to let us know. And Mike can help us get it in the list of example reports over in the community site. So if you haven't seen it, it's always worth looking at. See if it was a good place to start. Again, every report should be reviewed by you to make sure that it's capturing the data that it's supposed to. You also can end up using different fields in LegalServer than another program. Like you may have used a different race lookup or a different ethnicity one. So you can't assume that because it's got an ethnicity column that it's gathering it from the same place as the fields that you use. But the reports examples would be a good place to start for pretty much any new complicated report that you need to create. So we'll be looking for examples to put there. And we heard also, at least one person is using case matter information and then the LAV information and combining them in an Excel spreadsheet. Are there any other comments about reporting and reporting out of LegalServer? Are there particular problems that you run into in trying to generate the data you need for LAV? Besides Mary, Mary, feel free to speak up. But I think we probably have some more modification to do to set your LAV report up to get these pieces of data out.
I think that Steve and I will have to work on maybe designing some type of a report, and if Montana can help us out, that would be great.
Great. Great. Anyone else want to share their experience about reporting? Getting data out of LegalServer? No? Okay. Well, we will, like I say, we're always looking. So when you think you've nailed it, I mean, frankly, even if you think you've nailed it just for you, but you find that the report is giving you what you need, if you wouldn't mind emailing me or support at LegalServer, just any of us, we would love to take a look at it, because I'm sure this comes up pretty often, that someone ends up with a complicated grant and they're looking for how to pull the data back out. So we would love to be able to have that in our email and use the power of search. I would search LAV report and see what's been sent me, or put it up in the examples for folks to see and download. And that really is what we plan to cover for today. We have a lot of great folks on the call, though, so I'd love to hear if anyone had other successes or issues or questions about LAV reporting, or suggestions for their fellow community members. Kristen, you haven't said anything the whole meeting. Are you paying attention? I think Kristen's program.
Hang on.
Apparently not.
I am. I'm multitasking. I know you can tell. We are like a sub-grantee, so we don't. We just report a small portion of what we do to LAV, to somebody else's LAV grant. So I don't think our particular program doesn't need these extensive fields. So I'm going to double check, but that's my current impression.
That could be a relief. On the other hand, hopefully you'll be able to give them data. You know, now you'll know exactly the format that what is really being asked. Because I think sometimes with sub-grantees, you end up playing a game of telephone where someone interprets it and then tells you what they think they need, and then lo and behold, 6 months later, when it gets rejected by the funder, they say, "Oh no, change that piece of data. That's not right."
I think we're doing a lot of correlating our fields with the fields requested, and it may be that I can do a little bit to automate that process a bit for the person that handles the sub-grant for us.
Great.
So, great call.
Terrific. Okay, and I just saw one from Vivian. So I hope that this has outlined what the data requirements are, and for those of you who are brand new grantees or planning for the future, I think you can see that there's some complexity here. So my suggestion is, as soon as you know that this is something you need to report on, it's time to start looking at how you collect data and make sure that you're gathering it all at the front end. And then definitely well before reporting time, run some test reports to see if what you're getting out matches what your needs are. Stick it under the nose of whoever it is in charge of that reporting. Great. Marshall, how did we do?
Awesome.
Great. Great. Are there any other questions? I'm here. You got us. I'm off to more configuration, fields, lookups, reporting, support tickets, and whatnot after this. So I'm happy to chat with you guys instead if anybody has any questions or comments. No? Okay. Well, I'm going to thank you. I'm going to ask you just to